One of the interesting things about it that we saw even with the 70 billion is we thought it would get more saturated. It's like we trained it on around 15 trillion tokens.
Yeah.
And I guess our prediction going in was that it was gonna asymptote more, but even by the end, it was still learning, right? It's like we probably could have fed it more tokens and it would have gotten somewhat better. But I mean, at some point, you're running a company, you need to, there are these meta reasoning questions of like, all right, how do I want to spend our GPUs on like training this 70 billion model further? Or do we want to kind of get on with it so we can start testing hypotheses for Llama 4? So we kind of needed to make that call, and I think we got it. I think we got to a reasonable balance for this version of the 70 billion. That was fascinating that you can just that it's the architectures at this point can just take so much data. And I do think in the future, it seems quite possible that more of what we call training for these big models is actually more along the lines of inference generating synthetic data to then go feed into the model. So I don't know what that ratio is going to be, but I consider the generation of synthetic data to be more inference than training today. But obviously, if you're doing it in order to train a model, it's part of the broader training process. So I don't know. That's an open question, is to kind of what the balance of that and how that plays out.
If that's the case, would that potentially also be the case with Llama 3? And maybe like Llama 4 onwards, where you put this out and if somebody has a ton of compute, then using the models that you've put out, you can just keep making these things arbitrarily smarter. Like some Kuwait or UAE or some random country has a ton of compute, and they can just actually just use Llama 4 to just make something much smarter.
I do think that there are going to be dynamics like that.
Actually, I found the synthetic data thing really curious. I'm actually interested in why you don't think, like current models, it makes sense why there might be an asymptote with just doing the synthetic data again and again.
Yeah.
But if they get smarter and you use the kind of techniques you talk about in the paper or the blog post that's coming out on the day this will be released, where it goes to the thought chain that is the most correct, why this wouldn't like lead to a loop that, of course it wouldn't be overnight, but over many months or years of training potentially with a smarter model, it gets smarter, makes better output, gets smarter, and so forth.
Well, I think it could within the parameter of whatever the model architecture is. It's just that like at some level, I don't know. I think like today's 8 billion parameter models, I just don't think you're going to be able to get to be as good as the state-of-the-art multi-hundred billion parameter models that are incorporating new research into the architecture itself. When you're building software, there's like a ton of stuff that you can do with software, but then at some level you're constrained by the chips that it's running on, right? So there are always going to be different physical constraints. And it's like how big are the models is going to be constrained by how much energy you can get and use for inference. So I guess I'm simultaneously very optimistic that this stuff will continue to improve quickly, and also a little more measured than I think some people are about. I just don't think the runaway case is like a particularly likely one.
I think it makes sense to keep your options open. Like there's so much we don't know. There's a case in which like it's really important to keep the balance of power so nobody becomes like a totalitarian dictator. There's a case in which like you don't want to open source the architecture because like China can use it to catch up to America's AIs, and like there is an intelligence explosion and they like win that. Yeah, a lot of things seem possible. Just like keeping your options open, considering all of them seems reasonable.